What is going on, YouTube? This is Coded Steel bringing you your 6th tutorial in the C programming language. So remember last time I said we were going to start discussing control statements. So first control statement we're going to discuss is the if loop. So let's get right into that. The first thing we're going to do is declare a variable, which is nothing new. So we're going to declare an integer x, and then we're going to get some user feedback. And I'm going to add that via the scanf function that we discussed already in one of our earlier tutorials. And it's going to store that value in x. Don't forget the ampersand, the scanf function, which allows you to store in the address of x. Anyways, now on to the meat of this tutorial. So what we're going to create is something called an if-else structure. So there's actually three parts to this. There's the if. I'm going to create an else if, and I'll explain what all these do in a second. And actually, that's pretty much it. Okay, so what the if statement does is it is a statement that allows you to execute a block of code if a certain condition is met. So basically these conditions are it can be all kinds of different things. It could be whether x is equal to something, like 2 maybe, or less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to, or greater than or less than, or a few different operators that can be put inside of the if parameters, but we aren't going to get into them. But basically what it does is it takes this line of code and it tests it to see if it's true. And then if this is true, it'll actually take this and replace it with like a 1, and the code will execute. So basically I'm going to show you guys an example. What we're going to do for the first one is we're going to test and see if x is less than 10. And then our else if is going to be if x is equal to 10. And then our else, we don't have to put any parameters because it'll execute no matter what. So inside of this if statement, we're actually going to put a printf statement that is going to say the variable x is less than 10. Alright, so that's what we're going to say, is that it's less than 10. And then we're going to say is equal to 10. And then we're going to say the last thing, which is greater than 10. Okay? So basically what this line of code, these lines of code are going to do is this code is going to run through when we execute it. It's going to run through after we input our number. It's going to test this statement first. If this statement is false, it will basically put a 0 inside of here. So it'll do this, and it'll just skip over this line of code. If this is true, then it'll put a 1 in there like I showed you before, and it'll execute it. And then if this passes, this won't execute. So basically it works like this. If this statement passes, neither of these two pieces will execute. If this fails, then it will test this, and if this passes, then it won't execute this. And then finally, if both of these fail, then it will automatically perform this, which is why we didn't need to put x greater than 10 down here, like something like that, because if these two fail, it automatically will say, hey, x is greater than 10. So let's run this code now and show you guys what it does. I could have put a prompt sentence there, but I just decided not to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to enter 2. So if we enter 2, it should say the variable is less than 10. The variable x is less than 10. Cool. It did exactly as we wanted it to do. So now we can execute it again, and I can show you guys what else I meant here. So now we're going to type it in as 10. The variable is equal to 10. So guys, even though you can't see it, it actually tested this first, and since it failed, it tested this, which passed, and that's why it printed out the variable is equal to 10. And then finally the last one. Oh. Which we're going to do 678. Variable is greater than 10. Cool. Alright, so then another thing I want to show you guys. We're going to take the stuff out of here because there's really no need. I'm going to take the scanf out. I wanted to show you guys one more thing. Basically, how you know that it's doing this. So I'm going to put a 1 in here, and by default this loop is going to execute. So I'm just going to show you how C does this. If you guys can see, it says the variable is less than 10. It executes because basically I put a 1 in there, so it's automatically going to execute by default, which is what C does when it tests. If it tests and it tests okay, then it returns a 1. If it's not right, then it returns a 0. So guys, basically I'm going to show you something else. If I put a 0 in here, this line of code will actually not execute now, no matter what. But this line of code now should execute because I put a 1 in there. It's going to automatically, by default, the variable is equal to 10. And it does, exactly as we expect it should. And then finally, what if I put a 0 in there? Well, now I'm saying this if loop's false, this else if loop is false, so my else should execute. Well, let's see if it does. Variable x is greater than 10. Cool, it does. So basically, now you guys should understand how this whole if stuff works. If you create a structure that looks like this, it's going to do if blah blah blah. Oh, if this passes, then it doesn't execute these. If this fails, then it goes to the else if. If this else if passes, then it's going to not execute this. If this fails, then it's going to go on to the last. Oh, this is an else. I have to execute this. And another thing you might need to know, guys, is that actually you can put an infinite number of else if statements in here. I could put a ton of them in between this thing. And if this if fails, then it'll test that else if, then that else if, and all the way down a chain until you finally put in your last else loop, which will be the default condition. So as you guys see, this can be a very handy control statement when we're creating codes where we want to make decisions and only execute certain blocks of code. Up until this point, we didn't have a decision not to execute certain lines of code. You had to execute every single line of code in the compiler. Now we have a choice. We can choose which lines of code to execute with the if statement. So that's the tutorial on the if, else if, and else statements. Next time we'll discuss another control statement, but until then, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.